Okay, the recording's on. It's 1 o'clock. Let's get going. Good afternoon and welcome to our second Saturday seminar series. Hard to believe it's December already. You know, 2 years ago this month, we started this webinar series. It was still in the middle of COVID and on a really, really snowy day. And that seems like yesterday. And that is available on our website. If you go to the events page on our website and look for past events and scroll way down, you could see us freezing out there in the Joy Cabin. It's totally different today. I'm Susan Jones, and Charles D. Ferdinando is here with me today at the Animas Museum. You know, one day this summer, a gentleman came in to visit the museum. We try to make sure that when our visitors are leaving, we make sure to thank them for coming and see if they have any questions and make sure they visit the Joy Cabin and the Peterson House. And on the way out, this gentleman asked, you know, there's so many interesting exhibits here in your museum, but why don't you have one about the churches in Durango? Well, he didn't have time to explain. He had an appointment to get to, but it really started us talking. One of the things that we realize we don't have enough room, first of all, to have another exhibit on churches. And probably even more importantly, we really don't have a lot of artifacts to support an exhibit like that. So as we kept thinking some more, we thought, let's do a webinar and a mini pop-up exhibit. And here we are. So today we're going to talk about worship in early Durango. And please remember, we've only got an hour. And I know Charlie's been kind of frustrated because he's found so many good stories as he's been doing the research on this. Each one of these stories could be a whole webinar in itself. So this is going to be a really high level look, a broad look at the history of the early days of the churches in Durango. We may miss some great stories, so we'll apologize up front, but we still think that this is a great and interesting overview. First, as usual, let me do some quick Zoom housekeeping. We're using Zoom's webinar feature, which means that you're all muted and your videos are off. At the bottom of your screen, and you may need to mouse down a little bit to see it, there are a couple icons to minimize distractions. We've disabled the chat function. If you have an immediate issue or question, please click on the Q&A icon and we'll be monitoring that. At the end of the talk, we'll open up for questions. You can either type them into the Q&A and we'll let you answer. We'll set you up to answer. You can either type them in and we'll answer them at the end, or you can click on the little hand icon and we'll allow you to unmute yourself and ask your question live if you would like. This session is being recorded and you will receive an email within 24 hours with a link to the recording and any other resources that we have talked about today. So with that, let me turn it over to Charlie.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Let's go to the first slide. This photograph here, well, two photographs. We have a portrait of Reverend George Darley, who was he was a doctor of divinity. He was a Presbyterian minister, and he was sent to Western Colorado to minister to the mining camps and to establish churches where he could. The photograph there shows a log saloon. There's a bear out there in front. We're not real sure about the identity of this building. One person says it's Rockwood. Another person says it could be early Animas City. But George Darley wrote a little memoir called Pioneering in the San Juan, and it talks about his early experiences traveling into this area and trying to establish churches in all of the mining camps. He came to Animas City in July of 1877, and it was a rough trip coming down from the headwaters of the Animas. He had crossed the Continental Divide up there and there wasn't much of a road, rough trail. His companion for the trip was a rough guy who didn't have much use for clergymen, and was a rough talker and sort of gave him a hard time on the trip. So when he got to Anima City, he needed to get a shave and a good night's rest. And he went around looking for a barber. And in his little booklet, he talks about going to the back of a saloon where there was a room where someone had a rudimentary barber chair set up that could give him a shave. And I guess it was a rough experience getting that shave, because he talks like the barber had been drinking a little too much and had a shaky hand, and he got nicked several times. So let's go to the next slide. This is the Elkhorn Club in Anima City. We know this is Anima City. And Darley preached on probably the night of the 11th of July in this saloon in Anima City. And he secured enough signatures to petition for establishing a Presbyterian church organization in the town of Anima City. Darley traveled to Ouray and Rico and Silverton. He preached in all of these in these Western Colorado mining camps, also over at Lake City, and so forth. So he was probably the first Presbyterian in this part of the country. So he established a Sunday school at that time, and probably after this date, when he was not available to conduct services, Sunday school was held in some of the members' homes. So let's go to the next slide. The result of his work to establish a church community in Anima City resulted in the building of the Presbyterian Church in Anima City. It was a sort of rough-hewn looking building, just rough boards, never was painted as far as we know. It was on the hillside up probably at the head of what would now be 32nd Street, where 32nd Street runs west up into the hillside. The church would have been up there. In the spring of 1878, the Presbyterian Church appointed a Reverend W.C. Beebe as pastor of the church in Anima City, and he served as pastor up until 1887. The picture over there to your right, and there's a red circle, that's around the church, the Presbyterian Church building. Again, it was up off of what is now 32nd Street to the west of Main Street. This is an aerial view taken of Anima City in the 1920s, early 1920s. So it's looking westward, and you can see the bend in the river there, and you can see the 32nd Street Bridge and Main Street. You can also see the stone school building that now houses the museum south of where the church building is. Let's go to the next slide. Here's a very early picture of Durango, and we've got three church buildings circled there. But before I talk about those, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Jewish community in Durango. There were Jewish people who came to Durango very early during the founding of Durango. Some of those people were the Steins, the Rapps, and several others, the Karpanskis, and so forth. Rachowski, the Rachowski family, and so forth. So there were Jewish people in the community, but as far as we know, they never had a large enough congregation to actually build a synagogue. Now, one of the reasons for this may have been that with the railroad, they came in with the railroad. With the railroad, they had access to larger population centers, such as Denver, where there were large Jewish um, uh, populations and communities, and they could travel by rail to attend services on high holy days and so forth in those communities. And also, a lot of those families had relatives living in cities like Denver. So anyway, Abe Rachowski came to Durango and established a dry goods store. Again, Morris Stein came very early. His in-laws established a store in Durango, which he then took over. And again, they were here, but were never formally organized as a congregation. And again, a lot of times when these people passed away, their remains were shipped to Denver via the railroad and buried in Jewish cemeteries such as Mount Nebo in Denver, which is part of Fairmont Cemetery up there. Another early family that came to Durango were the Garden Schwartz family. Grandpa Garden Schwartz was a cattle buyer, and he was in this area very early, buying cattle, which were then shipped by rail out of this area to feedlots and slaughterhouses in Denver and beyond. So also, we can't forget about Otto Mears. Otto Mears, considered one of the pathfinders to the San Juans, of course, was Jewish. And of course, he was over in Saguache before he crossed the divide over into Western Colorado. So let's go on. We've got a lot to cover, and I wish I could talk more about that. But since we're on this picture, we have three buildings circled there. Over to the right, upper right, there's a little dark colored building there, which is on 2nd Avenue. That was the original St. Mark's Episcopal Church that was established by Parson Hogue, C.M. Hogue, who came very early. Over in the center, the picture, the building circled there is the Methodist Episcopal North Church, the Northern Methodist, and the lower right is the Presbyterian Church. And you can see in the background there, this is an early view of Durango, and obviously this is before, this is in the 1880s, before the big fire of 1889. So let's go to the next slide. Here is a picture of Parson Hogue, Reverend C.M. Hogue. And down below there is an enlargement showing St. Mark's Episcopal Church. And there's a little drawing up above, which was placed on an early map of Durango. Parson Hogue established the first Protestant church in Durango. He held, according to the Durango Record, it was stated that on Sunday, December 26, 1880 at 3 o'clock, a small congregation gathered in the dining room of the Delmonico Hotel, where Reverend C.M. Hogue a minister of the Episcopal Church, held services, the first of the kind ever held in Durango. Mr. Hogue is sent by the ecclesiastical authorities to found an Episcopal parish and build a church, which he will set about doing at once. And he organized the first Sunday school on January the 16th of 1881. This church was built of boards which Parson Hogue basically carried from the lumberyard on his back, and he is credited with actually framing up the building and getting it enclosed. Originally, it only had a sawdust floor, but the church was officially opened on March the 27th of 1881 with appropriate services, according to the Durango record of April 15th. Now, some of the other, the Catholic Church sent Reverend M.E. Brennan to the new town of Durango on July 7th of 1881, and he began his ministry here at that time, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So let's move on to the next slide. Here we can see sort of a close-up. Again, this is a blow-up of that other picture. This is the Methodist Episcopal Church, which was located on the corner of 11th and 3rd Avenue, what's now 11th and 3rd. And this was the ME Church North. The Methodist Episcopal Church had split. There was a northern church and a southern church, and the split occurred because of the Civil War and the issues of the Civil War. A Reverend William Osborne arrived on April the 14th of 1881, and by the end of April had organized a church of 25 members who formed a building committee. This building was dedicated by the presiding elder of the Southern Conference of Colorado, the Reverend Earl Cranston, on January the 15th of 1882. Structure, lots, and furnishings were listed as costing $4,786. And on the day that Cranston came to dedicate the church, there was still a balance of $1,514 when he preached in the morning. And he announced that he would not dedicate the church that evening if that debt was not cleared. So by the time the evening service rolled around, the debt had been cleared, or there were pledges made to clear the debt. The building was 28 feet wide and 50 feet long and had a bell tower 60 feet high, and it boasted a 900-pound bell which had been cast in Baltimore. Let's go to the next slide. This is a close-up picture of the Presbyterian Church, which was organized in Durango on December the 12th of 1881. The building was dedicated on May the 28th of 1882. When the building was dedicated, it wasn't completely finished. They were still waiting for stained glass windows and some of the furnishings, and also an organ. They had a borrowed organ for their dedication service. Let's go to the next slide. This is St. Columba Catholic Church. The parish was organized on June the 12th of 1881. Father M.C. Brennan was sent by the Bishop of Colorado, who was Joseph Moshboof. And one of the first things that he did, he arrived in Durango on April the 16th of 1881. he went about looking for Catholics and trying to get organized. In the early days, he held services, held mass at Peter J. Keegan's home on 3rd Avenue. He also went out to Fort Lewis, and he presided over a mass at Fort Lewis for Catholics in the service out there. There was a lot written about him. He was very active in the Order of Hibernians, being a good Irishman. On July the 7th of 1881, he celebrated the high mass at Fort Lewis. On July the 28th of 1881, he attended a concert at the Baptist Church, and the newspaper made a big deal about him attending this concert at the Baptist Church and actually sitting next to Protestant clergymen on the same platform. So I think he was a little ecumenical in his beliefs. Again, he organized a parish. Robert Dwyer, who was one of the first settlers in the valley in 1873, along with Mr. Quinn and several others, were the ones who laid the foundations for the church, and so forth. So Father Brennan was very popular in the early days of Durango, but things started to change. Many of his parishioners, of course, were associated with the saloon owners because they were Irishmen. And the newspapers started a campaign against the saloons and gambling and drinking in general. And Father Brennan chose to side with the saloon owners and support his parishioners, and he would not take a stand against them. And so the newspapers turned against him. And he was attacked by Carolyn Romney in the Durango Record of March the 15th of 1882 because of his stance, not wanting to prohibit gambling and so forth. She also made comments that he was politically motivated and so on and so forth. So he ends up leaving Durango, and he's replaced by another priest by the name of Luke Harney, who patches things up in Durango and becomes a very popular pastor. Again, the parish was organized June the 12th of 1881. The newspapers made a big deal about the arrival of the bell for the church and the organ. The bishop came down from Denver to especially have a ceremony to bless the bell and to dedicate the church and so forth. This picture is not the earliest picture of St. Columba. This picture is taken in the mid-90s, but this shows the original look of the church. We can tell it's in the 1890s because to the back of the church is a stone rectory, which was built in 1895. And over to the right is St. Mary's Academy, which was the girls' boarding school that was operated by the Religious Sisters of Mercy. That was also the location of the first Mercy Hospital in Durango. Let's go to the next slide. Here's another picture of St. Columba Catholic Church. This picture is after 1911. In 1911, in 1910 and 11, a lot of renovation was done to the church. The picture to the left, you can see scaffolding on the steeple. The steeple had been enlarged before this, but in 1911, the entire exterior of the church was stuccoed to give it a more permanent look. It was a frame building, but the walls were all infilled with brick, and they wanted the church to have a more substantial look. So in 1911, even the spire on the steeple was stuccoed, and different stone was embedded into the plaster, and there was white quartz that came from one of the mines up in Silverton. There were several types of stone that came down from mines up in Silverton and were placed into the plaster to give it an interesting look on the exterior. Also in 1910, the original windows were replaced with new stained glass windows. The interior was remodeled because prior to this time, St. Columba's School was actually located in the back third of the church building. When the congregation grew, they needed more room in the church. And so the schoolrooms were demolished out of the interior of the church. The church auditorium was enlarged, and more pews were added, and the stained glass windows were added. The large rose window in the front of the church was donated by the Amy family, who at the time they donated the window had moved back to New York, but they had come to early Durango and were active members in the parish in the early days. They were the ones, the Amy mansion that now houses Hood Mortuary is where they lived. It is said that the cherubs that are pictured in that window are portraits of the Amy children. I find that hard to believe, but that's one of the stories that went around. Let's go to the next slide. Here is a picture of the Baptist church. This is the original Baptist church. It was organized on March the 13th, 1881, according to the Durango record of March 19th of 1881. The organizational meeting was held in St. Mark's Church. They agreed to build a church 25 by 45 feet and with a ceiling of 12 feet. The building was dedicated on August the 13th of 1881, and the building was used by other denominations until their buildings were completed. It sounds like in the early days, the Baptists did not have a full-time minister. So there were times when the church was not being used, and so other denominations who were organized but hadn't built their churches yet held services in this building, such as the Methodists and the Presbyterians for a short time. When the Baptist congregation built their new stone church in 1901, this church building, which was located on 4th Avenue, was sold to the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And when at some point, after the African Methodist Episcopal Church was no longer in existence, the building was purchased by the Foursquare Gospel Church, which would have probably been the late 20s or early 1930s. Let's go to the next slide. This was the new Baptist church. This is what this building was built at 1076 East 3rd Avenue, the intersection of 11th and 3rd Avenue. They had the cornerstone ceremony on November the 23rd of 1901. The building was built at a cost of $9,197.70. This building has been enlarged twice. It suffered at least 3 fires, which um, the building was saved, but the interiors were destroyed. Um, there were major additions in 1948 and 1958. Let's go to the next slide. This is the German Lutheran Church, also known as St. Paul's Lutheran Church. This building was located, well, it's still standing. It is located at 1162 East 4th Avenue. A man by the name of George Gigline helped to organize the first Lutheran church in Durango in 1884. And between 1884 and 1887. They rented places to hold services until 1890 when this building was built. And he's credited with being one of the major contractors who built this building. In 1892, the parish of St. Paul's joined the Missouri Synod of the Lutheran Church. It was referred to as the German Lutheran Church because they conducted their services in German for the German immigrants who had come to this area. Once this church was organized in Durango, there was also a large German population over in the Thompson Park area between Durango and Mancos. And there was a stop on the Rio Grande Southern Railroad known as Dix. And it was in Thompson Park. And those people over there built a church, and it was referred to as Zion Lutheran Church. And the minister, whoever was the minister or pastor at the Durango church, was required to travel by railroad over to the church at Dix or Thompson Park and conduct services over there. They had a rough time keeping pastors because they didn't, because of that, him having to oversee 2 churches. Their congregation was not very large at times, and by the First World War, of course, there was anti-German sentiment. And I think at that time is when they sort of dropped the German Lutheran notation, and it's known more as St. Paul's Lutheran Church. Eventually, this congregation outgrew this building in the late 50s, and they constructed a new church up on Junction Street, which opened in 1961, and that is where that congregation still resides. In the 1970s, another Lutheran church was organized in Durango that was affiliated with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. It's known as Christ the King Lutheran Church. Let's go to the next slide. Here's a great overview of Durango taken in 1889. And the red circle up there, I'm sure it's hard to see, but there's a little sort of white dot there. That is St. Columba Church. And St. Columba Church, of course, survived the big fire on July 1st of 1889. So St. Columba Church, the building, is the oldest surviving church building in the town of Durango today, because it did survive that fire. The Episcopal Church, the Methodist Church, and the Presbyterian Church all succumbed during that fire in 1889. Let's go to the next slide. Here's a little better view of North Durango. Over there to the far right, St. Columba Church is circled. It was painted white in the early days. Over to the left of it is the Methodist Episcopal South Church. The Southern Methodists came to Durango very early, and this was known as the Little Stone Church, and it was built on the corner of 20th and Main Avenue. Just to the south of it, you'll see a two-story building there. That is Whittier School. That was also known as the North Side School in Durango. Let's go to the next slide. Here's another overview of Durango. Over here to the far right, you can sort of see the face of the new Presbyterian church that was built after the fire. Right above it is the new Methodist Episcopal North Church. Over to the left, lower left, is St. Paul's Lutheran Church or German Lutheran Church. And above that is the new St. Mark's Church, built after the fire. Also, you see the new courthouse right above the Methodist Episcopal Church, and down towards the bottom center there is the new high school, which was built in 1892, which later became the Mason School property. It was known variously as the junior high and Central School after the 1916 high school was built. Let's go to the next slide quickly. Again, this is a little later view. This photograph was taken after 1901 because right there in the center, you see the new Stone Baptist Church on the corner of 11th and East 3rd Avenue. Over to the right of it again is the Methodist Episcopal Church. To the left, upper left, there is St. Mark's Episcopal Church, and lower left, St. Paul's German Lutheran. Let's go to the next slide. Here's a great color picture showing the interior of the stained glass window, which is on the front of St. Mark's Episcopal Church. The figure depicted in this window, of course, is St. Mark. And you can also see the baptismal font there in front of the window. The picture to the right is an early view of the new stone St. Mark's Church. The cornerstone was laid in 1892 for that building. Let's go to the next slide. Here is a sort of a close-up picture of the new Presbyterian Church that was built after the fire. The cornerstone was laid on June the 13th of 1890. There's two little vignette pictures on either side. Over to the left is an early picture of the choir in the choir loft there. Eventually, a pipe organ was purchased and placed in that niche, and then the choir was placed would be in front of where the pipe organ was installed. Let's go to the next slide. Here are some early pictures of the new Methodist Episcopal North Church, and the picture on the left also shows the parsonage. These were both brick buildings. When this new church was built, it had a very stately steeple there. But we hear that there was no bell. The original church that burned had a bell, but we don't know if the bell was destroyed in the fire, and then they just didn't have the money to buy a new bell. But a lot of jokes were made about that bell tower because it lacked a bell, but it had bats. So the Methodists, people made comments that the Methodists had bats in their belfry. The picture to the right is a tinted postcard image of the church in the early days. Let's go to the next slide. Here's a close-up picture of the Methodist Episcopal South Church, which was located in North Durango, up there at 20th and Main. This was the Little Stone Church. It was the Southern Methodists were organized by Reverend Oscar E. Sensabaugh, who arrived in Durango in November of 1881. He was here right at the beginning, but he had a difficult time trying to organize his congregation. And he was even turned down by several churches when he asked permission to hold services in their building, because he was told that Southern Methodists did not have a place here, that he should go back where he came from. So anyway, this picture also shows the brick parsonage, which was built in 1890 to the south of the church. The original parsonage was a small frame building that was located behind the church. The Methodist churches sort of began a merger in 1933. Both the Northern Methodists and the Southern Methodists in Durango were struggling to support their churches. And so they agreed to start alternating where they would hold their services. So one Sunday they would be down at the church in Durango, in South Durango, and the opposite Sunday they would be in the Little Stone Church up here. This was at about the same time that the national Methodist churches were negotiating to reunite, and the national unification of the Southern Methodists and the Northern Methodists occurred in 1939. This church was eventually sold to School District 9R because Whittier School was just to the south of this building. And that caused a lot of discontent with some of the early Southern Methodist congregants who did not want the church sold. And eventually it was demolished. There's a gas station on that corner today. Let's go to the next slide. This is a picture of the Free Methodist Church. This was located at 976 4th Avenue. The church was organized in 1908, and it met in homes and schools, storefronts, and also in the Folsom building, which was located on West 9th Street, just behind the old First National Bank building. The Folsom family were members of this church, and that's why they probably had use of that building in the early days. On May the 14th of 1917, it was announced that the Free Methodist Church people have purchased what remains of the old brewery building after the fire and will utilize the lumber and stone in building their new church on their lots at 10th Street and 4th Avenue. So they had purchased these lots sometime earlier. There was a smaller building at the back of this building that was probably used for a short time till they outgrew it. It became Sunday school rooms when they finally built this building. But a lot was made of them building their church. They were staunchly anti-drinking and so forth. They were big supporters of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. So they made a sort of a joke about constructing their church out of a den of iniquity. So let's go on to the next slide. These pictures to the left is Sacred Heart School, and to the right is the new Sacred Heart Church. We don't have a historic picture of the original Sacred Heart Catholic Church, but Sacred Heart Parish originated as a mission of St. Columba Church in 1902 and was formed by the Reverend James Duffy, who was the pastor of St. Columba. The actual parish was formed, they got parish status in March of 1906. But across the street from the building pictured here on the right was this old stone school building, which they opened a school there, and the school was staffed by the Religious Sisters of Mercy, who also taught at St. Columba School. And to the south of this stone building was a frame building, which was the original Sacred Heart Church. Both of the stone school building and the original frame church building were demolished after the new stone church was built in the 1930s. What's interesting about the new stone church, it was built out of stone that was salvaged from the coke ovens that were located just west of the smelter on Lightner Creek. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, we're not quite finished yet, but this is I love this picture. It's a wintertime picture. These horses are standing probably on the median on 3rd Avenue, right out in front of the Methodist Church. This would be at 11th and 3rd Avenue. So what I'm going to do here is to talk about some of there were other churches who did not build buildings, but were active in the community in the early days. The Christian Science denomination were very active very early in Durango, but they rented meeting rooms to hold their meetings, or they met in different people's homes. They always advertised their services in the church directory and the newspapers. They finally built a church on 3rd Avenue at 12th Street and 3rd Avenue in the 1920s. But some of the early meeting places were like the Newman Building downtown. And once the Carnegie Library was built in 1907, they used the meeting room in the basement of the Carnegie Library for many years to hold their services. The LDS Church was in the area, but did not have a church in the early days. They rented lodge halls at various times to hold meetings. There was also the reorganized LDS Church present in the community. Back in 1881, there's newspaper references to a congregational minister being sent to Durango to administer the congregational church. I have yet to find anything else about any Congregationalists being in Durango. They may have merged at some point with another group. There was one strange group that was here for a short time. It was known as the Christian Catholic Church in Zion, which was a sort of a strange, sort of a cultish type group that was founded by a man by the name of John Alexander Dowie. He actually built a utopian community called Zion, Illinois, just out of Chicago. But he was Scottish. He started out as a street preacher in San Francisco. He was known as a faith healer. There's a lot about him in the newspapers around 1900. And one of the things that church did in Zion, Illinois, was to establish a lace making company, and ministers of the church traveled the country as traveling salesmen selling lace from the Zion Lace Works. And one of those people was a gentleman by the name of Reverend A.E. Arrington. And he came to Durango on a regular basis peddling products. And he somehow endeared himself with the editors of the Durango Herald. And for a time, church meetings were held in the home of the editor of the Herald. This church, as a denomination, tried to establish a colony down in Las Vegas, New Mexico. I don't know if they ever were successful at that, but there was a lot of controversy with that organization, and I'm not sure if it even exists anymore. One of the other early churches was the Seventh-day Adventists. They organized in this area around 1898, and they rented a storefront that was owned by Charlie Neglin, near 14th Street. This storefront was next to his blacksmith shop, and Charlie Neglin's daughter was involved with the Seventh-day Adventist congregation. There's also other early references of a Seventh-day Adventist minister traveling from Durango to Chama, New Mexico, to perform funerals, etc. Eventually, they got enough people. They held tent meetings on a regular basis and revivals. Many of the churches got involved in having revivals, and many of the Protestant churches in Durango would band together, and they built what they called tabernacles, which were temporary structures to house these revivals. They brought in evangelists to conduct these revivals. The other church, early church, was the Christian denomination, and they struggled on and off. Again, they were involved in these revival movements. They eventually built a church structure at 12th and 2nd Avenue before 1916. And that was also a site for these revival tabernacles. But anyway, the Christian church sold their property to School District 9 when the 1916 high school was built. And 2nd Avenue, which ran through the site of where the 1916 building is, was closed. And they rented space at different times and moved around, and had locations at different places. In the 1970s, they eventually purchased the Methodist Episcopal Church at 11th and 3rd, and that is their current location. So we're out of time, and I'm sorry, I've got lots more, but we've got to stop. Does anybody have questions?
Okay, we have one question.
Yes.
Do you know anything about the Baptist minister Reverend Holman Benjamin Turner and his wife Myrtle? They were in Durango in 1885 to 1890 or so.
I'm sorry, I don't.
We may have to get back to you on that one, Kathy. I've got some notes, and we'll see what we can find out.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Feel free to type them in the Q&A or raise your hand, and we'll let you unmute. So while anybody is typing, I definitely want to say thank you to Megan Reed and to Elsa Horowitz, who helped us with the research for this webinar. And I love this picture too. this final closing picture. We do have our mini pop-up exhibit on churches. It's set up in the classroom, and we would be glad to answer any questions or do some research. Like we'll learn about Reverend Turner, and just come on by the museum, because Charlie has so many more stories that we uncovered in doing this research to share that we just didn't have enough time for today. So we had the Christ the King Lutheran Church started in the 1960s, not the 1970s. Good. Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, we didn't get much to the later stuff. Let's see, anything else coming in? Well, if you still think of any questions, let me do some shameless self-promotion. Our pop-up on the churches is up. Please come on by, ask us questions. As you see, we don't have a lot of artifacts to support this kind of topic, but we have an awful lot of information that we'll be glad to share. The Rio Grande Southern pop-up is still in place in the entryway, and that's a lot of fun with big pictures of the galloping goose, which everybody loves. So come on by. There's no admission fee, and we're open Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. and Wednesday and Friday afternoons from 1 p.m. until 4 p.m. Things are quieting down a little bit for the holidays. Just so you know, we are going to close early at 2 p.m. on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, both Saturdays this year, but otherwise we'll be open the week between Christmas and New Year's as regular, starting Tuesday. So if you have holiday guests in town, bring them by for a visit, and we'll tell them all about Durango and La Plata County. Our new exhibit series called From the Earth, the Timeless Beauty of Pueblo Pottery has started with support from the City of Durango Lodgers Tax Funding. Our founding director, Robert McDaniel, is the guest curator, and we're taking a look one at a time of some of the historic Native American pottery that's in our collection, most of which came from the old Durango Public Library. We have a beautiful San Ildefonso pot that's on exhibit right now. And in January, Robert will be the speaker for our webinar on January 14th at 1 p.m. talking about this collection. The sign up for the Zoom is on our website on the events page. So the link is right there. Kind of as a teaser for February, this summer, we did an oral and video history with local legend Dolph Coos. And we're looking forward to releasing it in February. Stay tuned. We want to do a real tribute to Dolph and his legacy. And February seemed like a perfect time because he was such a part of the skiing scene here in Durango. And finally, if there's no more questions, I'll do a check one more time. Thanks to Charlie and to Megan and Elsa, and to all of you for joining us today. If you want to see continued programming like this, hit the donate button on our website or support our annual campaign and match that's going on right now. But thank you so much for joining us, and have a happy holiday. We'll see you next year. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.